Ahí tenemos todos los latinos, ¿no? Mira qué bueno. Ok, qué bueno, qué bueno. ¿Hablo en español y en inglés o lo hablo en inglés? Oh, español. So I got to do Spanish and English, huh? Ah, we can do it. Así lo podemos hacer. Um, First, I'd like to let you know that two wonderful people who are here to talk to you a little bit about substance use. Aquí tenemos a dos personas que te van a hablar un poquito sobre el uso de drogas. Drogas de todo, from fumar cigarro y tomar alcohol, que todas las otras drogas. Um, and most importantly, what I want you to know is that the majority of time why people use drugs is because they're disconnected, traumas in the past when they were young, but disconnected is one of the things that we've been talking about a lot. Una de las razones que la gente usan drogas muchas veces, y como digo, drogas son fumar cigarrillo, es alcohol y todas las otras drogas que están usando en la calle. Pero eso viene la mayor parte cosas que pasaron cuando alguien era joven, pero también es por estar desconectado. Y ustedes están todos juntos aquí, pero cuando se van a la casa, ¿qué es lo que pasa? Una de las cosas que sentimos nosotros, no solamente nosotros, todo el mundo, es, ¿cómo se dice loneliness en español? Soledad. So loneliness is an issue that we've been looking at and really understanding that disconnect, loneliness, actually, our Surgeon General calls it a public health crisis of loneliness. And so one of the things that are important in those situations are support groups. And how do you, for whatever issue you have, how do we have support groups for that? Which is one of the support groups that is here, which is AA. It doesn't mean you could have been doing it in the past. You could have had an alcohol issue 30 years ago. But how do you maintain, how do you have some communication, and how do you have support with each other? So, muchas de las cosas que debemos de hacer es como ahora ustedes tienen un grupo de gente que están juntos, se ayudan. Y cómo traemos más grupos así que se pueden conocer, que se pueden ayudar, que es bien importante para todos. Y estos dos tienen un grupo que quieren empezar aquí. Yo quiero empezar aquí. I want to say that I wanted to start this program here because I think it's important. Yo quiero empezar ese programa aquí porque es un grupo que le da support. How do you say support? Apoyo a la gente. No importa si tú tomabas alcohol hace 30 años o si lo empezaste ayer, pero cómo se sienten juntos y hablan de las cosas que están pasando y cómo se comunican uno a otro es lo más importante que podemos hacer. So este es un amigo mío, los dos son amigos míos de mucho tiempo. These are two gentlemen who've been friends of mine for a long time. We've talked about substance use for forever. And like I said, it's whatever the substance use may be. I also think that substance use is also my addiction, which is sugar. So I don't know if I can go into your group and talk about sugar and how much I eat, but I can gain 3 pounds in one day, which is what I just did. But this is Jack Maroney, and this is Jim Dorita, and they can tell you a little bit more about themselves and. I'm going to give it to you.
So I've been doing this work for 39 years, close to 40 years. And the way that I got into it is through my own experience with substances, alcohol, medications, illegal drugs, legal drugs. It didn't matter. And I'm not going to bore you with my long story of it, but it took over my life for probably 20, 25 years. And then the bottom fell out, and I found recovery, and through the programs that Dr. Castile had mentioned, have been able to rebuild a shattered life and go on to do some things that I think are important, especially when it comes to this topic. So, oh, look at that. There you go. So, you could have read that. You didn't need me to tell you all that. But anyway, So when that happened, I started to get really curious as to how did my life become what it was, which was a mess. And I wanted to understand it, so I started to study it. And I went on to study it, and as you can see, I went on to study it, and then went on to study it. So I've spent 16 years in school studying this sickness we call addiction because I wanted to know what happened to me. I thought I was a good kid. I thought I was a smart kid. And my life was a total mess early. And I didn't understand why. I understand a lot better now about how addiction takes hold and what it does to people. And so that's what we're here to talk about. I'm not here to tell you my sad story of my life. I just gave you the sort of condensed version. I started out innocently, curious to see what alcohol and drugs were all about, and it took over, and once it took over, I had no control. Once it took over, I was a passenger on the bus, and wherever it went, I went with it. And a lot of those places were not places I'm proud of or that were fun. A lot of pain, a lot of heartache, a lot of misery, a lot of loneliness, a lot of disconnection, a la Dr. Castile. That's what it was about. And that's what addiction is about. And so we're going to talk about that today. We're going to sort of skew it toward the older or elder population because what we're noticing from the data is, I made some cheat notes if you'll indulge me. Number one, you can see there are more of us. We're living longer, there are more of us. And when I say us, we are part of that cohort. Yes, thank you. I'm 72 years old. I won't reveal how old my friend Jack is, but suffice to say, we've known each other for over 60 years. Friendships don't last that long, usually. We've been friends a long time. We've done a lot of work together. We've tried to carry the mantle of, educating, treating, helping people to understand this thing that we've come to understand, sad to say, through some really hard knocks. But they're valuable lessons. And so we want to share them in hopes that it can spare one person the same heartache, headache, torture that we went through. And if we do that, then I think we're successful. I'm currently reading a really interesting book on leadership. It's called Start With Why. And the premise of it is, any organization, anyone that makes anything or sells anything will tell you about it, what it is, and how they do it, but they don't tell you why they do it. So, what we do is we try to educate people. We try to share our experience, strength, and hope with people in hopes that it helps them. The why we do it, I just kind of gave you a little bit of a hint of, is because we want to try to prevent that person who hasn't gotten here yet, some of the torment, tragic life and trauma that we've experienced. And if we can do that, then I think we're doing something really helpful to contribute to society. We spent a lot of years kind of a headache to society. Well, I should speak for me. For many years, I was a headache to society. I was out of control. I took from anyone who would allow me to. And when we got together sort of to start doing this, we thought, maybe it's time we give something back. Maybe it's time we start to give something back to our community to try to help. And so we've been doing that ever since I stopped using drugs and alcohol. We've been trying to give something back to our community because we believe in it. So I'll start with your right, my left, this here. We tried to come together, and there was a third friend of ours that, I don't know if you can read his name, Henry Grossi, our friend Hank, who we grew up with. And we all went through whatever we went through in life and somehow survived and came out the other end and thought, again, we should share those experiences to try to help someone else. So we sat down and we started to write this manuscript. It wasn't a book at the time. It was a manuscript, and we all took apart, kind of told our story in hopes of our stories could be the vehicle to tell the greater, bigger story, which is there's a real problem out there, but no matter how horrible or how bad things are, you can change, you can survive. We did. And that's the powerful message that we bring. is no matter how far down the scale you go or in what shape or condition your life is, you can change it. It is possible. We're living live testimony of it. And so I'm a believer, and I know my partner here I can speak for is a believer, and that's really why we do what we do. And we do a lot of different things. You saw somewhere in the opening that we represent an entity called Lake Ave Recovery. We have been involved in the treatment business. We have open treatment centers. This is our recent one. And 5 years ago, 4 years ago, between 4 and 5, Jack said to me one day, what do you think about doing something in our community? Because we've worked in other communities, and we opened a facility up in north of Fitchburg, up in Ashby, Mass. And so he said, what do you think about doing something in our community? We grew up here on Shrewsbury Street. This is our backyard. And I thought, yeah, okay, what do you got in mind? And so we started to talk, and it developed into a day treatment program for people with substance use disorders. And so we've been doing that for the last 4 years. It's here in Worcester, down on Lake Avenue North, which is down right on the sort of shores of Lake Quinsigamond. I sound like a commercial. I know the people in this room will remember on the shores of Lake Cochituate. Anyway, it was for Carling Brewery. So we wrote this book and, put it out there for the world to see, which really bears our soul, the good, the bad, and the ugly of who we are. I wasn't really thrilled to have everybody in the world know all of the stuff that's in there, especially my daughter. She was around 12 at the time. And I remember Jack and I having a conversation. I said, I'm really scared that she is going to look at me differently when she knows. And she did. She got her hands on the book, and she read parts of it or all of it. And she went to my wife. She said, so Dad was a heroin addict? And when my wife told me that, my heart sank. I thought, there it is. She's going to look at me like some kind of leper or some kind of, lunatic. Thankfully, that hasn't happened. The reverse has happened, is she has become more respectful of what we do. She loves what we do. And I'll give you a quick testimony that she called me one day. She was going to school on Long Island, and she called me one day. She went to high school at Wachusett. And a friend of hers from high school overdosed and died. And she called me, and she was really upset. And at the end of the conversation, I can't believe I'm getting freaking emotional. At the end of the conversation, she said to me, I just wish he had known you. Maybe you could have helped him. And I thought, bingo, there it is. She gets it. She gets it. I don't have to worry about it anymore. And all her friends are familiar with who I am and what I do. And really kind of look at it differently, look at it as a positive, where I was afraid they were going to look at me with that stigmatizing, oh, he's one of them, but they didn't, and I really appreciate that. So we wrote this book, and it talks about all the things that we've learned along this journey. We want to share with people in hopes that it might help people. And so, one of the things, I'll give you my cheat notes, is it's a lot to read, but oftentimes people have different interpretations and versions of what addiction is. And they can vary. If I polled this room right now, if we had time, and I won't do it, but if I had time and I polled this room, I would probably get a whole bunch of different versions of what you think addiction is. And that's okay, it's not right or wrong. The quick and the dirty, I used to think was alcohol and drugs are what made me what I was and all the problems I had, and if I just stopped using them, my life would be great. What I found out is that wasn't quite the case. My life wasn't so great before I ever picked up alcohol and drugs. The alcohol and drugs are what helped me to be able to cope with my life, and I didn't know that at the time. And then they took over my life, and then I was no longer in charge or in control. I went wherever the drugs and the alcohol took me. And they took me to some horrible places. They took me to jail. They took me to the state hospital. They took me to treatment centers. They took me to the street, places that I really didn't set out that I wanted to go to. That was not my life's ambition, but it took me there, and I didn't seem to have any control until I broke it with treatment. Going to treatment helped me to do a timeout from using the drugs, and the more I distanced myself from them, the healthier I became, and the more I could try to figure out up here what happened. How did this train come off the tracks? And it's been 39 years of trying to figure that out. And so one of the things that I've learned, and I think we share, is, people defend oftentimes, well, I don't drink that much. I don't drink in the daytime. I only drink wine. I only drink beer. I only smoke pot. I only do this. I only do that. And the bottom line of all of that is it doesn't really matter a whole lot what the substance is. I've come to learn that in my old age. Doesn't really matter. Sugar, cannabis, alcohol, they do the same thing. If you become one of those, quit pushing. If you become one of those 10 to 12% that become addicted to alcohol and drugs. A lot of people use alcohol and drugs, but not everybody becomes addicted to them. We know from the research that between 10 and 12% of the people that do become addicted to them. Those are the people that concern us. The people that drink socially, casually, whatever that is, they usually don't suffer the same problems. They don't have the same kind of headaches that the other 10 to 12% do, that seem to lose control and go wherever their addiction takes them. And so that's one of the greatest lessons is, how does this stuff impact your life? Not how much you drink, what do you drink, how frequently, where you drink, those types of sort of incidentals. What's important is what happens to you. And so we know that, hang on, this is the one I wanted. We know that, people that use alcohol through their lives or in their lives, normally, and I say normally in quotes, starts to decrease after you get to age 60. You have other problems in life. And so going out and partying on the town starts to kind of lose its luster. And so people decrease the alcohol use. However, those are what we consider normal people, normal drinkers. 10 to 12% of the population that use these substances don't start to decrease. If anything, it just progresses on and on, more and more and more. And it gets worse and worse and worse. And when you couple that with the other complications that come with aging, and I'm beginning to learn those well, is the problems just sort of continue to escalate, and some of those problems are so let me sum up the problems: social, physical, medical, psychological. Nothing more emotional than feeling isolated and alone. And we know, Jack and I did this presentation at a place called the Cambridge House. Jack was at it, or the Cambridge Home in Cambridge. And what we talked a lot about was the isolation, especially as people age. The cohort starts to thin, friends pass away, family members go on and do what they do and live in different parts of the world or whatever, and life becomes sort of smaller and smaller almost. And in some cases, especially with people that struggle, alcohol and substances change how you feel. They make you feel different. That's why people use them. We use drugs and alcohol, especially the way that we do in our society, because they change how we feel. And if we don't like how we feel, we change it. And that's fine unless you're in that 10 to 12% that once it gets a hook in you and it takes over, you're not in control anymore. It is. and it will take you wherever it takes you. Sad to say, it takes people to the grave early. It takes people to the hospital, the psych ward. Funny, all the places I ended up. It takes you to those places, and when you're feeling alone, it becomes harder and harder and harder. So we know these are some of the risk factors. I kind of alluded to some of them in a generic fashion, that as life goes on and changes, the risks can increase. The risks can increase. When we talk about comorbid psych disorders, it's a fancy way of saying I got other problems. Depression, trauma, Jack alluded to trauma in the opening, anxiety, anything that kind of makes me feel a little distressed. I take 2 Valiums, have a couple of drinks, that stuff doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I'm anxious. Smoke a little marijuana. Doesn't matter if I'm depressed. I start to feel better. And that's appealing to people. And so people do it. It's functional. It's functional. If it didn't provide any of that for us, thank you for the reminder. If it didn't, and mine is on, if it didn't provide any of that for us, we wouldn't use them. Would you keep going and give your money in the vending machine if nothing came out? I wouldn't. If we didn't get anything from alcohol use or drug use, we wouldn't continue to do it, especially given the risks. And here they are. And this is not an exhaustive list. There are more. And so we just want to kind of, again, raise people's awareness, help people to understand what this thing is. And again, I don't know how you define it or how you see it. Some people see it as, the stigmatized, old person in the trench coat with a bottle in a brown paper bag. That's an alcoholic. Or someone hanging out at the bar until they're incapacitated and can't walk. Or some of those sort of stereotypical versions of alcoholism or addiction, that we get through the media. And I'm not saying those are not correct or whatever, but it's so much broader than that. So much broader. We've come across people, the most difficult individual that I ever treated was a Harvard professor in Chinese literature or something like that, Chinese art or Chinese literature. The most brilliant, we used to sit and have conversations that were incredible. Ended up dying because his alcoholism killed him. He couldn't stop drinking. He was so smart on all other affairs, but couldn't understand this simple concept that what you're doing is taking you in the wrong direction. Couldn't figure that out. And it's not he couldn't figure it out intellectually. Where he couldn't figure it out was down here. He knew, he was smart enough to know using the quantities of alcohol he was using is not healthy. He knew that. Just couldn't stop because it was bigger than that. When we talk about treating this thing, we talk about mind, body, spirit, a holistic approach. You cannot just put someone in a detox, get them off of the alcohol or the drugs that they've been on for 25 years, and expect that they're going to be great. There's so many other indicators and factors, variables, that we need to consider. Housing, employment, mental health. Tell me if I'm leaving any out. Housing, mental health, employment, childcare. These are the things that cause people stress. And when people feel stress, they reach for something to eradicate it. It's not rocket science. It really isn't. When I don't feel good, when I have a toothache, I want the dentist to give me something to make the pain go away. When I have distress here, I want something to make that go away. I don't want to feel it. I don't want to deal with it. I just want to get rid of it. And that's what addiction is about. So how much or what, whether I drink tequila or Chivas Regal or whether I smoke marijuana or inject heroin, it doesn't matter to me. What matters is what's going on, here's the Mate quote. So Jack and I have a sort of, one of our favorite authors is a psychiatrist named Gabor Mate, who's up in Vancouver. And this really kind of synthesizes what I've been talking about this sickness we call addiction. People take umbrage with, well, it's not a disease and da-da-da-da-da. And go on and on and on and get lost in the quagmire of all of that. Cut to the chase, and it hits home. It's an attempt to solve a problem. That's what it is. There's a great book out, and they made it into a movie called Beautiful Boy. It's about a journalist named David Sheff and his son Nick's addiction. And he knew nothing about addiction until his son became addicted, and he went on that roller coaster ride with him. And at the end, he wrote this book called Beautiful Boy. And one of the most profound things in that book that struck me and still sticks with me today is he said, the most important thing that I learned from all of it was drugs and alcohol were not my son's problem. Those are where he went to solve his problems. And I thought, well, that's brilliant. Yeah, they become the problem, but initially, they're just substances. They're just substances. But if I need them, I depend on them, I become reliant on them to solve my problems, that's when you have the groundwork for addiction, is when I think drinking whatever's in that bottle or sniffing whatever's on the table or injecting it or whatever I do with it, smoking it, again, it doesn't matter. When I think that is going to solve all of this, I'm ripe for addiction. I'm ripe. And over continued use, I, you, anyone else, in psychology we call it classical conditioning, I will become addicted.
So I want to ask you, and I don't know if you have the answer, but why is it that addiction is so much more in this country than elsewhere in the world? Yo quiero saber que por qué adicción es un problema más grande en los Estados Unidos comparado con los otros países del mundo.
I can give you my version of an answer. My friend up there is much smarter than I am, and I'm sure he will give you a different one. It's funny, another story. I went to South America with a group of students. We went to Chile. And so I was at a university with a bunch of faculty and myself, and I asked them, being this close to Colombia, how come you don't have the same, let me rephrase that. I said, being this close to Colombia, Peru, you must have an unbelievable drug problem. He said, no. Number one, we ship it all north to you folks. And number two, we just approach it differently. We treat it differently. We educate ourselves about it differently. And I thought, I wonder if that could work for us. It's a different mindset. It's a different culture. When you look at various cultures, they just see it differently. The use of substances, the use of people on this planet have been using substances to alter their mood since we first discovered them. Thousands and thousands of years. It's not new. Some of us approach it different than others. And for some of us, we approach it in a way that, it could be medicinal. There are cultures that use pretty intense drugs for medicinal purposes or religious ceremonial uses. I think we educate people in a way that, number one, we glamorize it. If you watch a Super Bowl, you watch any kind of sporting event, I don't know how many times you're exposed to advertisements that if you drink Bud Light, you will grow hair. Something miraculous will happen to you. You will get a beautiful girlfriend and go sail around the world on a yacht, and it's all fictitious. It's all marketing, and it's all crap. But yet we absorb it. How many times or how many ads do kids see before they even know what alcohol or drugs are? It's kind of, embedded in their thinking that thing, whatever it is the answer. That thing, whatever it is, will make my life great. And all I need is, I almost said $6. How much is a six-pack? I don't even know. It's been a long time. But whatever, all I need is a $10 bill and I can go and get some. And it will change me. And for some people, I mean, it might change them. I don't know if it gives you the, luxurious sailboat and a beautiful model next to you, or, brings you to those places. But the bottom line, I think, for the most people that use those substances, they elevate their mood, or they help them feel a little better. But that 10 to 12% that get sucked into the vortex of addiction, Dr. Castile is an advocate and well-versed in how many people we lose every year to this. And the sad part is every year it gets greater, the number gets bigger, and every year the age group gets younger. And that scares me. That scares me. I have a kid who's 24. Her friends the same age, and I've watched them through elementary school, high school, blah, 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 on. And it scares me to know this is what's out there. So my wife and I have spent inordinate amounts of time trying to educate her about all of this. And she obviously has to make the decisions that she's going to make, but I want her to make those decisions armed with knowledge and information when it comes to, should I smoke that cigarette? Should I smoke that joint? Should I take that drink? Should I do this? Should I do that? At least she's armed with information. And so that's why this is so important, is to share information. We are not the be-all and end-all, I assure you. What we can share is what we've learned, in hopes that that will help you. Anybody ever hear of another wonderful author named Brene Brown? She does a presentation. I love her. She does a presentation that talks about when you do what this gentleman just said, when you try to numb out only the bad parts, it's called selective numbing. But what happens, and people sometimes don't realize, is when you numb out the bad parts, you also numb out all the good, the joy, excitement. You numb everything. You can't selectively say, I just don't want to feel sadness. I just don't want to feel grief. I just don't want to feel emotional pain. You numb everything. And so you become this, emotional zombie that doesn't feel. Thank you for saying that, because that's where I ended up. I didn't feel anything. You could light me on fire. I wouldn't feel it. I just had enough alcohol and drugs in me that put this barrier between me and reality. And it was intentional, because I didn't want to feel the bad parts of reality. So this was like a cement wall around me that kept everything out. Problem is, you can't go through life that way. It's no way to go through life. So anyway, I'm going to try to close my yap and turn it over to my colleague and my friend. And if you sort of remember anything, it's, how about that? I did it without my cheat notes. This stuff is bigger, deeper, grander than just, I drink alcohol, it makes me feel numb, or it makes me feel good, or I use drugs and they make me feel good. That's the simple version. It's so much deeper, it's so much wider. And again, with different populations, adolescents are at risk, elders or geriatric population is at risk for various reasons that we've looked at. And I just hope that some of this helps you to kind of, understand it in a way that maybe you didn't before. And so that's why we come here, is to give something back, try to share our knowledge, our information, our experience with people in hopes that it helps them. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come here and sit through this and listen to what we have to say. Thank you so much for being such a wonderful group.
Thanks, Jim. So when Dr. Castile was talking at the beginning of this presentation, it brought me back to when I was 5 years old. I grew up in an Italian household. Both my grandparents came from Italy, and basically my grandmother spoke Italian all the time. And that's not too far from Spanish. So what I used to do as a little 5-year-old kid is I understood what my grandmother was saying. I just couldn't answer her back. So part of the problem, the soledad that we encounter, is probably the biggest underlying answer to your question The other thing I'd say before I get into what I think will be the history of alcoholism in the United States and probably shed a little bit more light on the question is the latest research says that the biggest single cause of addiction is Western civilization. It's the emphasis on individuality, competition, and the loss of belief in community. And I think if you look at that and you look at the course of what's been happening over my lifetime, last week I just celebrated my 75th birthday. And thank you, but unfortunately that 75th birthday came with a lot of hip pain, which will make me probably sit down before the end of this presentation. But anyways, I'm gonna kind of start right in on what I hope will be an interesting history of alcohol, drinking, and what eventually became the AA movement in this country. But way back, everybody drank. And everybody drank a lot. They started with a drink in the morning, very acceptable, another drink with brunch, drink with lunch, a drink in the evening, and then obviously a nightcap. This is what happened. So back in 1830, every man, woman, and child, even the kids drank back then, I guess, I don't know. 4 gallons of what that really translates to is pure alcohol. 4 gallons of pure alcohol, every man, woman, and child in the United States. That's how much alcohol we drank back then. In New York City, there was 1 bar for every 15 people, and they were always full. What happened? And this is a question for us today. What happened? So in 1845, it went down to 1 gallon. So we reduced the problem that drinking had caused in the United States back in 1830 by 400%. How did we do that? If we could only replicate that today with addiction problems, maybe our mental health problems, if we can figure that out, we'd probably make a big difference. And so part of what Jimmy started was a dialogue back and forth, and I hope to slow down a little bit to actually create that, give us an opportunity to really think, is what is it that they did back then that caused such a drastic change, and is there anything that we can do now? Now, Maddie's initial pretense, not pretense either, but whatever that is that you meant around community and isolation and all of that is probably the underlying core. And one of the things that Maddie wanted us as a group to do is kind of talk about ways, is how do we increase our community? How do we increase our interaction, our communication with each other so that A, we don't feel alone, B, we can share our joys and our sadnesses, and C, or A first, how do we create a community that gives us joy and happiness? Because if we're happy and we're joyous, then the need to kind of have a drink will probably diminish. And so how do we do that? So in the beginning of the book that we wrote, we had a quote by Abraham Lincoln, and he was one of the first that kind of tried to turn it all around. And one of the things that I really admired about Lincoln and reading his story and everything else, and why he was able to have so much empathy, is Lincoln suffered from depression himself. So he understood human suffering. And he understood that you won't beat human suffering by trying to beat it out of them. And so it was empathy, compassion, understanding of the things that we all need to remember when we try to interact with each other and try to understand what is happening in our lives. Now, at any point in time, raise your hand, stop, ask a question, because again, I think between myself and all of us in this room, we probably can answer a lot of today's problems, but we need to do it together. This was Lincoln again, and one of the quotes that I really liked the most, because I also went to Catholic school when I was a kid all my life, and as part of that, you basically knew every verse of the Bible. And when it said it came forth in society like the Egyptian angel of death, commissioned to slay, if not the first, then the fairest born of every family. And I always liked that quote because, again, it spoke to me. And when I looked at my life and said, why did alcohol affect my life? It was my inability to really understand everything that I was feeling, and my inability to be able to cope with those feelings in a reasonable way. Alcohol, drugs, whatever it was, took that away and made me feel okay. And quite honestly, it made me feel a part of. And I think that's all we ever want to do as people, is feel a part of. You know, I'll go back to the extended family thing. I think the breakup of the extended family is another kind of point in time we can put a stake in the ground. And as that dissolved, things continued to get worse in our country, I would say that at least. So this is actually intended to be the beginning of AA and how it all started. This is the history. And if you look at that, it actually started in Southborough, Mass. And it started with one of probably, I don't know the correct word, but it didn't start with someone that was poor and uneducated. It started with probably the top 1% of the country. And here's this person who was a relative of the cotton gin. His grandfather invented how to kind of harden metal. And this is a guy that could afford to get on an ocean liner and go and see the greatest psychiatrist of the time, Carl Jung, for treatment, and spend a year getting treated for alcohol. That was the beginning of how this whole kind of AA movement started, was with this captain of industry, so to speak, that needed to get treatment because his drinking was out of control. And so again, he went, visited Austria, spent a year there, probably cost him a small fortune, came back home, started drinking in a couple of weeks. Begged Carl Jung to take him back. He went back, and Carl Jung said, I don't know if I can help you. Here's the greatest psychiatrist of the time, says, I don't know if I can help you. I think you're hopeless. And that's back then where the term hopelessness came from. It's a term we use quite often, unfortunately, inappropriately today. I think that's probably one term that should come out of our vocabulary, because I don't think anyone ever is. So one of the things that Carl Jung actually believed in, and I happen to believe in it myself, so he's probably right, is that we were put here on this planet to become one in community and to be in communion with God. That was his belief. And he believed that the way people can change is to get back on that path that we were all born with. In my Catholic religion, we call it grace, is that we were all born with. And that would then somehow enable us to get back on a path where our beliefs, our ability to cope with life and all that would come back to a realistic place where we would be able to cope and cope appropriately. So Roland came home, returned home, and he actually joined the Oxford group, which was basically a religious group that had a set of principles, and the members of this group were to you know, their priority was to remain alcohol-free. And as part of the tenets of this group, he, and again, obviously he had some pull because at that time the courts released this Evie Thatcher into his custody because if Roland could stop drinking, maybe Evie could too. And then Evie actually brought Bill W., who was one of the co-founders of AA, into this group. So any questions up into here? I know this is an old history and it's a little bit, you know, maybe elongated out, but it's also kind of interesting how this all kind of came about. Because, you know, you can say it's coincidental, but at the same time, it was very almost ordained. So this was the Oxford group in its tenets. And for those of you that are familiar with Christian principles, you know, absolute love, absolute honesty, absolute purity, absolute unselfishness were the 4 pillars of this. And quite honestly, it's probably the 4 pillars of all of our lives if we want our lives to be easy and full of joy. These teachings were actually kind of expanded upon by William James and Dr. Silkworth in the first 6 steps of the Oxford group, which later became the 12 steps of AA, were admitted we were licked, got honest with self, got honest with another, made restitution, helped others with no thought of reward, and prayed to God as we understood him. So that was the beginning. And I think because us alcoholics were a little bit thick-headed, they had to just kind of like double them so that we kind of finally get it. And so this was Bill W., one of the co-founders of AA. He was, again, born in Vermont. New England was very integral in the start of AA. And, but both, and you look at Bill, and, you know, I'll fast forward a little bit, Bill Wilson also suffered from depression. And part of that you could probably bring back to the fact that his father left early, his mother, you know, his mother, it was said that his mother abandoned him, but actually she was the first woman to ever go to Harvard Medical School. And so, interesting, you can tell that they weren't poor. They weren't uneducated. They had probably all the opportunities that you would want, but yet these same afflictions kind of, you know, interact with us all. And then we go to the other co-founder, who's actually a physician, and this is Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob is also from Vermont. And interestingly enough, the heir to Goodyear Tires, Henrietta Sieberling, invited them both to her mansion in Ohio. Now, how does this happen? I don't know, randomly? Maybe. Is it ordained? Who knows? Maybe. But it doesn't happen at a level where 2 guys are standing on the corner and saying, hey, let's do this. It somehow probably happened for a really good reason. And so what happened back then is Bill told Bob his story, Bob told Bill his story, and that was the start of AA. And what they realized was sharing their stories with each other, as it will be sharing our stories with each other, was one of the secrets for ongoing success. Any questions about that to this point? I'm going to let Jim take over because I got to sit down.
Thanks, Jack. Yeah, I so much goes through my head when I listen, and it sort of generates thoughts about all of this connection and community, and I get flooded sometimes thinking about, there's a great trauma specialist in New England. His name is Bessel van der Kolk. And van der Kolk has been studying and treating trauma for years. And sad to say, a lot of the trauma that he treats has the addiction element and component attached to it. And he interested me, his writings, and so I went to a conference that he did, and this is where it ties to what Jack was saying. You know, I expected a lecture type format of, you know, the ABCs of trauma, and it wasn't that at all. What I learned was that, number one, people have been experiencing and treating, dealing with, managing trauma forever. It's not new. People have been suffering loss through war, illness in every community on the planet, as long as we've been on the planet. And so van der Kolk's question was, how did they do that? We didn't have medication, antidepressant medication. We didn't have anti-anxiety agents that we could prescribe you. We didn't have any of that, but yet people still experienced and had to deal with trauma. And what he found was, kind of looking at it through an anthropological lens, is that people did it by exactly what Jack was talking about: coming together, community, togetherness, connection. That's how they managed it. And when, way back in the days, different factions would go to war and come back and suffer extensive loss, the whole community or tribe or whatever they called themselves would come together in a ritual that played music and danced and ate food and comforted one another in that process. And it had nothing to do with, let me get my prescription pad and write you a script for some medication that will, you know, help you to sort of mask your trauma or your feelings. And it was a great lesson in that for me, because it connects to what Jack was talking about, is if, you know, addiction is an illness of disconnection. It's an illness of isolation. It's an illness of aloneness. And people sever the connection between them and anybody in their lives that means anything to them over time. And you end up, as a person who's addicted, further and further and further disconnected from people that care about you, people that can comfort you, people that can help you through whatever the darkest, tragic times are. We do that. That's why we have funeral services and things like that, where we come together to support and not only offer condolences, but to help those individuals to get through those really stressful, tragic times. And community is extremely vital. And when you tie it to the whole history of AA and support, that's exactly what we're talking about. And so, without sort of going too deep into our own personal histories, we are involved in a recovering community. And that helps. It helps to manage all of the things that life throws our way that oftentimes can be very stressful or very difficult. Instead of running to the comfort of the local bar room and ordering up a double shot, or the local drug dealer, or the local physician that can write me a prescription for some kind of medication, we come together as a community and support one another and help one another and encourage one another that you can survive this, you can get through this. And we do. And we do. It's sort of the magic that isn't really overly complex or complicated or magical at all. It's one person helping another person and just being there to say, I'm here. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do, but I'm here. And that's so meaningful for us. And when we get further away from that, we end up further alone. And I don't know about you, but I don't like to deal with my problems alone. I've done that. I've done that most of my life, and it hasn't helped. It always left me wishing there was some substance or something that could make it go away. And sad to say, those things are temporary, they're fleeting, and they're harmful, they're toxic, they're poisonous. But that's what I relied on, instead of a community of people that were just like me that could help me. And so, you know, the history is such that we got here, however we got here, through probably some pretty painful lessons. We're fortunate. We're fortunate that people were doing this when we needed, when it was our time, and we needed those people to be there. And our hope is that when those that come after us need that we will be here, and if we're not here, this thing that we have been a part of will be here for them, to help them to get through, to believe they can get through whatever it is they're going through without having to run to the doctor or the bar room or the drug dealer. Our hope is that by connecting and supporting one another when we're a little shaky or a little weak in the knees, that will get us through those tough times, and then we, in turn, can help the next person who's struggling and maybe a little weak in the knees and maybe shaky and needs a little help. We can help them. And that's what makes it work. And the beauty of it is there's no financial reward involved. There's no payment for any of it. There's no financial compensation or whatever. It's, again, in its simplistic form, which is, I think, what Jack did such a nice job of getting to, is one person helping another that understands it. Yeah, it's almost this spiritual connection that, you know, no doctor's going to write you a prescription to make you feel that I've been heard, I've been seen, this person gets me. Wow, that's really powerful. I've taken pretty much all the drugs that are out there. None of them do that. None of them gave me that. That's powerful, to know that I have connected with another human being. And that human being cares about me, understands me, and is there because they want to be there. That's how we get through all of this stuff that we experience in life, is leaning on each other. Again, it's not rocket science. It's not new. We've been doing it for thousands of years. It's how we get through. We may have lost it a bit, you know, over time. Societies have changed, and, you know, we've gone from these sort of agricultural, you know, everybody lived down on the farm and everybody knew everybody, and then, you know, the urban centers happened and people moved into the cities for work, and the family connections became looser and maybe more strained. And I think Jack's right. I think there's something in there that we've lost. We've lost that sense of community. We've lost that sense of connection. And if there ever is a way, I don't think science or medicine is going to figure it out. Nothing against science or medicine. I really believe in both of them. But I don't think they're going to figure this one out. This is a spiritual issue, as Dr. Jung said, that I think only this process can help us. I don't know if I've had doctors prescribe me all kinds of things and were supposed to help me or cure me or whatever they were supposed to do, and they didn't do it. They didn't do it, and I don't believe they can. I think medications are a valuable tool in treating this sickness, and they can stabilize us, and they can ground us and get us to a place where we can then move on to the next station, if you will, and progress in our recovery. And I needed medication when I first tried to stop using alcohol and drugs. I needed strong medication. And it helped me to kind of, again, get stable enough to start to clear up enough to start to realize what these people were telling me was true. I needed help. I thought all I have to do is stop drinking. All I have to do is stop using drugs, and life will be great. It was harder than I ever imagined. And so I needed help. I needed medication to calm the crazy that was going on inside of me that just wanted drugs to make it stop. Instant relief. That's all I wanted. That's all addiction is about, is relief from this stuff. Jack said it, I don't know how to cope with, or I'm not very good at coping with. You know, give me enough drugs, alcohol, whatever, and it will provide the relief that I need. And that short-term gain is what we become addicted to. Is whenever I'm distressed, I know I'll just take some of that and it'll go away. Problem is, 4 to 6 hours it wears off and you have to now redose. And so there's lots of problems that go along with that relief or that benefit. We'll try to bring it to this population of seniors that I am one of, proudly. And some of the things that we see and hear and learn from the research is there are a lot of seniors using a lot of substances. Some of them are prescribed and legal, and some of them are not. And again, I'm not here to morally judge what people do. That's not my business. But just to point out that in an objective, scientific way, the data, the research tells us this stuff. This is where we get it from. We didn't make it up, him and I, although we could, but we didn't. This comes out of the research. What we know about the elder population, the senior population, again, they're using a lot of substances, a lot of different substances. I never envisioned getting old and smoking marijuana. I did it when I was younger, but I never looked ahead and thought, you know, this will be part of my life when I'm a grandfather or whatever. So it's a little surprising, you know, and then go to the other ones, but it's not surprising given what I just said. People look for relief in anything they can get. Sometimes it's food. Sometimes it's exercise. Sometimes it's substances. It can be a variety of things. Without getting too crazy into the sort of scientific aspects of it, it's all biochemical. It all does something in our brain, to our chemistry, that releases these neurotransmitters that make us feel good. And that's a simple version. And so by eating those cookies can release that same dopamine hit that makes me feel good. Going on Facebook and looking at something that stimulates me and gives me a dopamine hit can feel good. And I can get lost in it and want more of it. Going to the racetrack, it's exciting. It stimulates this dopamine stuff that feels good, and I want more of it. And that doesn't make me any different than anyone else. Just if I don't know how to manage it and I don't know how to cope with it, then I think I'm in trouble. I think I'm in trouble over here too, to be honest with you. But that's okay. So all right. How many of these are left?
Way too many.
All right, so we're not going to be able to get to them. The dangers are the more of these things that people ingest, that people use, the further they are able and prone to get sort of, again, sucked into the vortex of becoming reliant or dependent on them, and the more problems, especially when you layer in people with hip problems or people with back problems. As we grow old, these problems increase. And so using substances and getting swept into this trance of addiction doesn't help any of those things. We push providers, healthcare providers away. We don't take care of ourselves in the way we're supposed to, and those things just exacerbate the problem. And so it's not a great scenario for anybody, regardless of your health or regardless of what age you are. But in seniors, again, I think we need to really be aware of this. And the isolation factor is huge. Amy, we have a question, comment?
I think a comment. I know as I get older, even the way Tylenol affects me is different. So that's another danger. As we grow older, our bodies react differently to substances. And I just also, all the talk about connection, I love seeing everybody here and connecting, and know that we all utilize the senior center in different ways to connect. And I will step ahead and say, after this program, we have a really brief survey in English and in Spanish that we hope you will fill in so we know where to go and next steps.
Yeah, thank you. And we would appreciate the feedback because it helps us to know, things like when I should stop talking, whether the information was relevant or helpful.
So really what we want to do now is continue the dialogue and conversation, and to a large degree, that dialogue and conversation is going to become informed by the survey that we're passing out. So the reason we're here is to kind of find out your thoughts on how to create community. What is it that's going to work the best? Is it going to be an AA meeting? Is it going to be a spiritual book club? Is it going to be health, wellness, and yoga? What is it that's going to give us an opportunity to create community, and even more importantly, or just as important, a dialogue between us? How do we do that? How do we maintain that? How do we get to know who we are on a personal level that's going to give us joy, freedom, happiness, contentment? How do we elicit from each other those shared feelings of community? And I think that's what hopefully we'll get from the survey. There's a lot of different roadmaps to happiness. And for all of us, some of them are different. And so what we're really trying to understand is, what is that roadmap that you want as a community here that will be most helpful for you here? And I think, one of the things that Dr. Castile has said to us over and over and over again is, I want to make the people that come to the senior center, their lives enriched. How do we add to a person's life? And that's the goal. And the only way we're going to know that is by you telling us what it is that you think will work for you.
I think I would be curious to know why you come here, period. What do you get from coming to the community, the senior center? Like, what attracts you? What brings you here?
Well, I serve on the Commission of Elder Affairs for the city, but I think I come here because I enjoy the fitness center, I enjoy yoga, I enjoy staying healthy, and this is one of the few ways I get to do it because I don't want to pay for a, membership in a fitness center that I might not get to, but here I have that option free, and it does a lot for our city. See a lot of people collecting and talking and visiting with friends, so that loneliness thing is a big thing. That was a big hit in the pandemic. And it has affected the senior center, and we've seen a resurgence of people coming back, so that's a good thing. So,
Appreciate that. So some of it is based on services, but what I hear in between is it's the people. It's the community that's here, that's been created, that people are attracted to and feel some sort of reward or benefit from. And it's no different than what we're talking about. Did people hear the question? There's been an increase, sorry, Jack, there's been an increase in the use of drugs in the senior population between 05 and 19. And the question was, what do you think what is that attributed to?
So one of the biggest contributing factors is us baby boomers entered into the field. And we were more comfortable with using drugs prior. So that was one of the things. The other big increase was the number of seniors in total period. So it goes back to the beginning slides. The senior population is booming. And and especially with us baby boomers, we're the biggest contributors to how rapidly it's growing. And then you add the fact that people are actually living longer, and that adds to it too. And then there was, quite honestly, there was also a proliferation of prescribing and stuff like that probably happened a little bit too often. That contributed to that too.
Just to dovetail on something Jack said about the sort of liberal prescribing practices, over time in our society, more drugs became invented, prevalent, and the prescribing of them became more liberal or looser. There was a time when, OxyContin and drugs like that were only prescribed for sort of post-surgical pain, end-of-life care, and now they're prescribed for back pain, leg pain, knee pain, head pain. Not that that's the cause, but it's a contributing factor. Again, there are evaluations up here that will help us to understand a little bit better, fine-tune what we do, and hopefully improve it. I want to take a moment to thank you all for your time and attention, your questions. We really appreciate it. Thank you for inviting us in and letting us come in and do this with you. We do appreciate it a whole lot. So thank you very much for everything that you've done.